Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. September 18th, 2025, the domestic terrorist edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast. I'm in Washington, D.C. from New Haven, Connecticut, where she is with Yale University Law School and the New York Times Magazine, at least unless she's been canceled. I don't think she has yet. Emily Bazelon, hello.
Working on it. Hello.
Don't say that.
It was a joke.
Nope.
From Manhattan, where he co-anchors the CBS Evening News and CBS Evening News Plus. John Dickerson. Hey, John.
Hi.
This week on the Gabfest, the aftershocks of Charlie Kirk's assassination, including the cancellation or I don't know if it's cancellation exactly of Jimmy Kimmel, something of Jimmy Kimmel, and the Trump administration's plan to retaliate for the assassination by going after left-wing groups. Then, are we at war with Venezuela? And if we are not, can Trump keep blowing up Venezuelan ships?
And killing people.
Yes. Then we will discuss the Trump administration's disturbing anti-democratic maximalist effort to control my dear home city of Washington, D.C. We'll talk to CityCast DC and Politico's Mike Schaefer about that. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. From improving emergency response times to protecting against cyber attacks, local, state, and federal governments are innovating with Google AI. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American innovation.
The week since the assassination of Charlie Kirk has proved deeply upsetting for all kinds of Americans for all kinds of reasons. On the right, Kirk's martyrdom has provoked an outpouring of sorrow as well as a very strong desire for vengeance against those they perceive to be somehow complicit in his death. On the left, Kirk's murder has created significant fear that the Trump administration will use it as a pretext to go after civil liberties and suppress and harass and maybe even worse, left-wing organizations and people. Here on Thursday morning, Jimmy Kimmel seems to have lost his job hosting a late night show for ABC for remarks he made about Charlie Kirk. So here's what Kimmel said about Kirk that got him in so much trouble with ABC and with the FCC.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. There's demolition, construction. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish, okay?
John, it's fairly unsettling. I mean, it's not exactly a violation of the First Amendment. These are his bosses. They can choose to take him off the air whenever they want for whatever reason. But it is disturbing that Kimmel is going to lose his high-profile platform because he said things that were offensive to people who admire Kirk and people who have different ideas about the motivations of his assassin.
Right. I think there's so many things at play here. There's what's legally okay to do, and Emily will weigh in on that. And the legal question, I think centers really around Nexstar, which owns a bunch of ABC affiliates, said they were going to preempt Kimmel for the foreseeable future because of these remarks that everybody can listen to. And I would say in any of these debates, it's really important to actually listen with your ear to what people say. And by the way, this is particularly true with the president, which is interesting. What it reads like on the page is actually totally different than what your interpretation would be if you listen to it with your ears. For example, last week, President Trump was asked on Fox about bringing the nation together. And he said, my answer is going to get me in trouble, but I don't care. And then he went on and basically said there's more violence on the left than the right, leaving aside the assertion in the second half of the answer. A lot of people read that and thought he was saying, I don't care about bringing the country together. People may come to that conclusion. But what he was saying, I don't care about, was not the question. What he was saying, I don't care about, was whether I get in trouble for this. And so you had to actually listen to what he was saying to understand it. You can draw whatever conclusions you want. But my point is, listen to these things before, just because they get down the road and then you have no idea what's being said. But the context in which this happened is Nexstar is trying to merge with Tegna. It's a $6.2 billion merger. They need FCC approval. The chairman of the FCC said on Wednesday that that some of these affiliates of ABC should say this kind of talk doesn't serve our local markets. A couple hours later, Nexstar announced they were going to preempt Kimmel. Then ABC said they were going to. This is essentially following a similar playbook with what people saw in the FCC's influence over the Skydance purchase of Paramount. And I'll stop talking. Emily, David, go.
So, Emily, what are the paths that Trump and the Trump administration might have to suppress speech that they find unappealing about Kirk or about other things, to actually target organizations that they claim are doing something that promotes violence or does something that could somehow plausibly or implausibly be connected to violence? Like, what can they literally do?
Well, let's start with this example. I mean, you just bully the organizations into compliance, right? So Brendan Carr, the chair of the FCC, makes some disapproving remarks, kind of threatening remarks about Kimmel. They don't like this interpretation of this killing, right? They want this to be absolutely straightforward. This was, as President Trump says, the quote, radical left responsible for killing Charlie Kirk. And there's no other allowable set of ideas. So let's just set aside, whether Kimmel was right or wrong in what he was saying, because that doesn't matter. That's not the test for whether we should have people on the airwaves without bullying by this powerful compliance arm of the federal government. And then the company caves because they don't want to have to be threatened for this merger that John was describing. That's a really classic overreach of government to try to affect the speech of a comedian on late night TV with that, huge amount of force that they can bring in terms of a commercial threat. Then you're asking another question, which I think relates to these remarks that, J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller have made about foundations like Ford and Open Society that they're blaming in this kind of shadowy way as being these networks of funders for quote, radical left violence. First of all, the idea that there's some direct connection here so far has zero evidence behind it. I mean, this idea that, Ford paid for an internship at The Nation in magazine in the year 2019 is somehow responsible for an article about Kirk in The Nation now that the administration doesn't like. I mean, there's so many things that are wrong with what I just said, right? It's one article in The Nation. And also there are these set of totally tangentious, not even barely connected facts back to these liberal funders that the administration wants to disempower. And so we're waiting to see what kind of executive order Trump actually issues. He can try to use the IRS to go after them. That would be hard. The president can't just on its own decide that, you can target a particular group through taking away their tax exempt status. But I mean,
that's legally the president
exactly
says, but the president can clearly send a message to the IRS, and the IRS can say, oh, well, we just happen to investigate it.
Yes. I mean, all of these things are sort of, right. Legally speaking, this is not allowed. It's not how the system is supposed to work, et cetera, et cetera. And yet Trump has shown so many times that he just barrels ahead anyway, and then the courts are hard pressed to stop him.
Can we separate for a second the measures taken after Kirk and the way in which Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, and others are using them, and just go back to Kimmel for just a second? Because in addition to the law, first there's the idea of whether the FCC has broad latitude to decide what's a community standard and in the public interest. And so it seems like, even though you may not agree with it, there's all this latitude, it seems, in the legislation. And Congress could fight back, but it's not in any position to. So I wonder if that's true. And then the second thing is, I think we might have run past the idea that the super important thing was your test, Emily, for free speech, and the fact that nobody related to the administration or its allies who used to argue that free speech was a good by itself and that was worth protecting, distinct from whether legally you could do what the FCC is doing, that nobody's standing up and for these, well, not nobody. When we get to the Pam Bondi thing, we can talk about the conservative backlash. But there is a distinct camp of people who believe in free speech as a necessary part of democracy, which is kind of distinct from the FCC's actual powers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sure, basic free speech values are implicated here. And yes, there is total hypocrisy going on where now, Pam Bondi is talking about how there is free speech and that is separate from hate speech, and she is going to target hate speech. That is not American law. It's not American values. This use of the FCC is kind of caught up in all of that, though I don't know how you could possibly characterize what Kimmel said as hate speech. But it's just all this swirl in which we don't like what you're saying. We're going to mix up all these different things and make it sound like there's some terrible conspiracy going on, and then use all of the maximalist powers of the government potentially to go after you.
And just to put a finer point on what you're saying, Emily, this is what President Trump said to Jonathan Karl. When Karl asked him about Bondi's comments, we'll probably go after people like you because you treat me so unfairly. It's hate. You have a lot of hate in your heart. Maybe they'll come after ABC. So that's the president, not Pam Bondi, the president saying, anything I determine as hate, the arm of the state will come after you for.
Can we get into the actual practicalities of what they can do? So clearly there are things which one finds deeply unpleasant and in doxing. So there are people who have said things about Charlie Kirk on social media, some of whom are high-profile people, some of people who are not high-profile people, but they're being identified and targeted, and some of them are losing their jobs. And this, I would say, is like somewhat analogous to things that have happened from the left to the right in the past. I mean,
cancel
I think
culture.
The cancel culture, and there are people who have said things about Kirk that go against the main narrative. They've highlighted things that they find offensive in what he has said, or hypocrisy in how his death is being treated, and those people are being targeted for their loss of employment just revealed. So that's sort of private sector action. What are the public sector action? So we see with Kimmel, this is the FCC strong-arming, using its powers either directly or indirectly. I mean, this is an indirect use of its powers to kind of, what's it called when you sort of bully, but at the second degree, where you don't, they didn't actually tell Tegna or Nexstar to do this. The Nexstar was just like, oh, we better do this because that's the safe thing to do. There's a word, I can't remember the word.
Are we in No One Rid Me of This Troublesome Priest period where you say something out loud and then somebody who wants to curry favor with you takes that action because they want, so it feels like we're a little bit in that territory.
Yeah. But then there's so Emily, you were starting to get into how you would use the tax code, how you might use the tax code, how you might use the designation as a domestic terrorist organization. So what are the mechanisms there, and what would the effects on organizations or individuals potentially be?
I mean, the president doesn't have any authority to just declare an organization a domestic terrorist organization and then remove its tax exempt status. There is no statute. Does that mean that Trump won't try to do something like that? I mean, that seems silly to discount any possibility, even though that's what the law is. That's one set of intimidation factors. Then there's idea of using racketeering charges. So that the way this would work hypothetically is that, you take a protest, like a protest against a Tesla lot, or something that hasn't happened yet. And you say that you can trace some amount of funding for this event through a group back to a foundation or another Democratic funder, liberal organization that you want to try to go after. That would be a real overreach of prosecutorial discretion and government authority. But again, that doesn't mean it won't happen. And Congress has been talking about revising the federal racketeering statute, federal RICO, to try to allow for more of this. They actually started talking about going after liberal funders and foundations, they being the administration, last May and June. So one way to think about this is that the Charlie Kirk murder, which was a terrible event, has become an excuse for this broader set of accusations and attacks on the left that the administration wants to make. And, even though some of what I've laid out is legally implausible, just talking about it has a chilling effect on people, on organizations, on people who give money, on other organizations who might take that money. It's all really bad for civil society and for democratic free expression. And I think that is part of the point here from the point of view of the administration.
And the way the chilling effect works is that if the president or one of his popular allies puts their finger on you, as a private citizen or as a media figure, there are a lot of people on social media who will rally to that cry. It's not even whether your license gets canceled or anything like that. It's whether, if you look at the reports of organizations that have had to increase their security as a result of the kinds of responses to things that have been said, you can see how the chilling takes place there.
Absolutely. And, just to get back to David's point, there's a real difference between private sanctions, right? Social forms of ostracizing socially, even firing. Some of that can seem really heavy-handed. And especially right now, it seems like some of it's being driven by fear of the Trump administration. And so we can debate how disturbing or not disturbing all of that is. Those are private decisions that people are making. They may be bad decisions, but that is really different from the government threatening to come after groups or individuals with these kind of implausible theories of the president's power, or just for the sake of kind of scaring everybody.
I want to continue in this vein, but to focus on something which is just a passionate idea of mine, which I talk about on the Gabfest repeatedly, but I just want to say it again because this is a thing I think our listeners just need to remember. The greatest strength of the United States as a nation vis-a-vis other nations historically is that we have all these different layers, that because we have local and state governments and because we have such an incredibly strong civil society, a civil society that has grown up at the grassroots of civic organizations, religious organizations, professional organizations, it has allowed us to remain a very disparate kind of nation where there's lots of different sources of power. And what authoritarian governments try to do is to reduce the number of sources of power, to concentrate power. And one of the things that I find alarming in what the Trump administration is doing is, we've already lost sort of a congressional counterweight to power, but is the accretion of all power in the sort of centralized Trumpist government. And that you see also the sort of nonprofit sector, the civil society sector weakening as a result. The most useful thing that you can do as a citizen, that you can do as a person, is to continue to be part of civic organization, nonprofit organization, professional organization, religious organization, local government, which acts as a counterweight to whatever the sort of oppressive national force is. And I was really heartened today, a totally separate issue we're not talking about, but there's this effort at the federal level to change how vaccines are administered and to change what is recommended. And you saw the organization of healthcare organizations that provide vaccines and insure for vaccines saying, we're going to continue to, despite what the federal government says, we're going to continue to pay for these vaccinations. And they're not doing it necessarily out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they must see some sort of benefit for it. But they're saying, like, there's a federal effort to oppress this, to suppress this, to change how people, but we're going to act civilly and privately to say, no, we're still going to keep covering this because we think it's valuable. And if we could have example after example after example of that, I think you do something to diminish this accretion of power into the national centralized government. So anyway, I actually now want to turn to a question for you guys, which, John, you will not even answer because you have something else that you've been waiting to say. But but historically, we've already seen analogies. People say, oh, this is very McCarthyite. What we feel here is this is a form of neo-McCarthyism. Laura Loomer talks about wanting to make McCarthyism cool again. Is this an analogy? Is this analogous to what was happening in the McCarthy era, and what is similar and what could be different?
You want me to give it a shot, Emily?
Please.
I have to clear away all my McCarthy anecdotes because, as everybody knows, I'm not a historian. But Senator McCarthy once beat up the columnist Drew Pearson in the bathroom at the Selgrave Club, and it had to be broken up by Richard Nixon. Anyway, McCarthy was a big drinker and he was drunk. McCarthy's energy came from the general energy behind the Red Scare. And so he was identifying, even within the U.S. Army and the American government, supposed communist sympathizers. And he used the power of his office to put the finger on people and the power of the national fear about communism and the global struggle between capitalism and communism as the energy behind which he could take his acts. Couple of differences would include there was a functioning Senate which had rules of decorum and rules and norms that McCarthy broke, and over time the breakage of those things got him into trouble. The thing that ultimately got him censured, I believe, was when he said basically the Senate was convening what he called a lynch bee, which I think is just a lynching. Saying that about the body that he was a member of ended up getting him censured. But it was the tail end of a long line of abuses of power. But most importantly, Dwight Eisenhower, who was the president, McCarthyism occurred basically during Truman and Eisenhower. Eisenhower, we later learned in history books, worked to limit McCarthy and kind of quietly move him, diminish his power. People can argue about whether he did enough and so forth and so on. But there are definitely people who argue that he allowed McCarthyism to destroy some people's lives. But suffice it to say, Eisenhower was not on board the entire McCarthyism project. The quote I read from the president before was the president interpreting speech that should be censured by the government as anything he doesn't like, anything that he says is hateful. And in the case of that quote, what he defined as hateful is anything that was critical of him. That is the president, not some senator, being the central actor here. There is no countervailing congressional force the way there was ultimately in the McCarthy case. Now, the question is there a public energy like the fear of communism? At the moment, the emotional reaction to the tragic and horrible assassination of Charlie Kirk gives a lot of this its emotional power. Does that sustain a long-standing McCarthy-like effort to chill speech or get rid of certain kinds of speech? Don't know.
I mean, I would love to soon invite a guest on to really talk about this, but I think that was a great introduction to it, John. And to me, what's always hard about these historical moments is that for me, McCarthy stands for this like absolutely terrible episode in American history. And so then I have trouble evaluating, comparatively speaking, where we are compared to it, because I just know that was like completely out of bounds and wrong. And this feels similar to me, but as you ended by saying, the difference here is that President Trump is fully behind this. I mean, for me, it was very chilling, that moment with Jonathan Karl of ABC, because I felt like Trump was, as he often does, delighting in the power he had to sound intimidating and scary and make it sound like, who knew what he meant by "we're going to come after you."
And also, this is completely delinked, although it's happening in the aftermath of, but the president's project to go after people who criticize him is super long-standing. I mean, it was before he even was in office. The use of the legal system to go after press organizations or enemies or whatever, and so that's, I think, useful context here as well.
Before we end this, I do want to flag something that I read this week which has really stuck with me. And there's been a lot of very interesting writing, but I liked David French's piece in the New York Times about sort of the monsters among us. And the point that French makes is when you identify the cause, what is it that motivated Charlie Kirk's assassin? What is it that motivated Melissa Hortman's assassin? The really poor tendency that each of us that people make on the partisan. When you're a partisan, you say, when someone on my side does it, it is an aberrant act. It's atypical. It is an individual. That's like there's something wrong with them. But when someone on their side does it, that's because how they are. It's who they are. They are the kinds of people that do this. And in fact, what it's true is that in any kind of divided group, like there are some people who for different reasons, and they're accelerants in social media, they're accelerants in like lots of parts of society, cause people to become monsters, cause people to take grotesque, violent,
monstrous acts.
Or to take monstrous acts. Sorry. Yes, you shouldn't say the person is a monster. To engage in a monstrous act, it never represents the whole. And like when you assume that other people's the motivations of others are wicked and the motivations of your side are fine, except for these exceptions, you just end up in this dialectical thinking, which is not at all helpful. And instead, you need to look at the sin among you as well.
Karl Rove has a piece in the Journal on Thursday arguing there is no they or them. It's just that the responsibility here lies with the assassin, and that to lose that along the lines of what you're saying, David, sends the public conversation into a bad place.
And it also should be possible to recognize that Charlie Kirk himself said hateful, cruel things, denigrating lots of different groups, and also that murdering someone is always wrong. And in the way in which he was killed is particularly startling for the culture because he was talking on a college campus. But in terms of the actual things he said, I think Jamel Bouie did a really good job in the New York Times of laying out, why people were critical of him as part of MAGA. And Ta-Nehisi Coates also has a piece about that in Vanity Fair.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Home Chef. Do you find yourself eating the same thing over and over and over again? Are you in need of inspiration? Home Chef is here to make searching for new meals and cooking a new dish something to look forward to. I recently cooked a delicious pork chop with blood orange, pistachio, 3 things which I rarely deal with. I never deal with. I know whoever deals with blood orange. And it was an extraordinary combination. Home Chef has everything you and your family need for hassle-free, delicious dinners. And with over 30 options a week, they cater to a variety of dietary needs. Users of leading meal kits have rated Home Chef #1 in quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering Gabfest listeners 50% off and free shipping on your first box, plus free dessert for life. Go to homechef.com/Gabfest. That's homechef.com/Gabfest for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. Homechef.com/Gabfest. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Do you struggle with procrastinating? You know, when you put off doing something that could save you a ton? Well, Mint Mobile's best deal of the year is ending soon. 50% off unlimited premium wireless for new customers. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile. And Charlie says it was really easy to switch providers. The SIM card was shipped to his home. They let him use his existing phone, didn't have to change his phone number. And he's on the $15 a month deal, and he's getting unlimited talk and text over their 5G network at literally a fraction of what he was paying with someone else. But hurry, because this deal ends September 22nd. Quit stalling and start saving when you make the switch. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/Gabfest. That's mintmobile.com/Gabfest. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 per month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Is the United States at war with Venezuela? Emily.
No. But President Trump seems eager to gin up a war. And so we now have actually probably 3 episodes in which the United States military has gunned down people on a speedboat that the administration claims is associated with Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan gang that it also is claiming is, quote, invading the United States. And this is profoundly disturbing from the point of view of, basic morality as well as law, because it doesn't seem like there's any evidence that there was a threat from these boats to the United States. The first one seems like it was turning around and actually heading back to Venezuela. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the people on it could have been detained, and instead they were killed when the boat was blown up. And now that I have really clued into this story, which I confess kind of got lost in my head earlier in the month, what is happening? The United States military is gunning down civilians with whom we are not at war. That is breaching an incredibly important part of military law and norms, as I understand it. Trump seems to be very eager to pick a fight with Venezuela, has decided that they are a good enemy, I guess. Jack Goldsmith, who's a law professor at Harvard who's been writing and talking about this, thinks that this is connected to Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act, United States, right? So it was Tren de Aragua members who Trump originally said he could deport based on this wartime act that he is using in this totally inflated way that no president has used before. And the whole basis of the idea of using that act to deport people here is that we're having some kind of war with Venezuela, and Tren de Aragua is like a proxy for the Venezuelan government. And so this all seems like tangled up in itself. Maybe if Trump provokes some kind of armed conflict with Venezuela because we are killing its people on the high seas, then that will justify his deportations here. And what is going on underlying all of this, except just this, again, maximalist view of presidential power?
Yes. There does not appear to be any legal justification either under United States law or traditional law of war for these attacks. So there's been this notion, this is what if one of the responses is, well, what if Al-Qaeda was in a boat? There's some Al-Qaeda members in a boat heading towards the United States to carry out a terrorist attack. Wouldn't we be justified in killing them? And you're like, well, that is an amazing hypothetical because it has literally nothing to do with the circumstances. With Al-Qaeda, there is an authorization for the use of military force that Congress has passed that allows expansive use of U.S. military power to suppress Al-Qaeda around the world. So that's number one. Number two, there's no boat of explosives. There's a boat which is potentially containing drugs,
which we don't even
know, and the drugs potentially heading towards the United States. But again, these are they're very far from the United States at the time they've been attacked. It's not like it's coming up at a beach at like West Palm Beach. There's a boat like it's about to land at West Palm Beach. That's not happening. And the people on it are not identified as military. They're not in some kind of organization. It's really amazing, John. But yet we reach this point where, because we have a supine Congress, we have a Congress that is unwilling to exert its own powers to declare war and to have a role in war and foreign policy. The president has basically a free hand.
Yes, and I think also, as I believe for a long time, when he crosses a line, in this case, essentially, I guess the justification here is basically commander-in-chief, and the commander-in-chief has to protect the country, and that's what I'm doing.
National interest, national security. Yes,
right, which has been used a lot in the administration, and that September 17th was the anniversary of the day they signed the Constitution. And if you were really full of your Constitution, you would say, yeah, well, wait a minute. Every time you exercise one of these emergencies, we should be nervous because we created this document with this central concern that the executive would declare emergencies for the purposes of doing things. And then when anybody tried to stop him, he would say, what, you don't think that there are emergencies and that I should be able to act in the case of an emergency. I mean, what if Al Qaeda was coming? That's an emergency. Why are you trying to stop me from Al Qaeda? So they recognize the slippery slope of these kinds of actions and would try to limit them, or at least have a big conversation about them every time they took place, because they recognize that it wasn't just about the instance, but the norm crossing or line crossing would make it easier to do it the next time. None of that is happening. Rand Paul, who cares about this issue, has criticized the administration and criticized J.D. Vance's, particularly his use of a barnyard epithet in slapping somebody who suggested that this was beyond the powers of a president to do this. That's a pretty small voice in this conversation. Also, by the way, just in general, the president has a whole kind of keyboard of activities here that he can do on any given day to put himself at the center of the national conversation.
Yeah.
And that has a lot of both, I guess, personal psychological, but also political effects that hijack the conversation. Whether it's National Guard deployments, blowing up ships, this now what will be long-term effort to go after the quote unquote them. So this is kind of adding this is just another sort of key on that keyboard.
Actually, Emily, I have a question for you. Another question for you on the legality of this, which is the naval officers who have carried out these orders. They're obviously carrying out orders that they feel they have to carry out. But are these lawful orders, and have they exposed themselves to some sort of criminal liability if they are not lawful orders?
Yeah, I feel worried about this. I was reading a post by the Georgetown law professor Marty Lederman in Just Security about this. And, he was arguing that not in favor of court-martialing any of these people, the opposite, because you want the responsibility to be high up the food chain, not with the people lower down. But he was arguing that this was unlawful, and he was imagining different justifications that, high-level officials might have said, it's none of your business whether this is legal or not. The president has authorized it. Just go ahead. The problem is that there's a really strong rule in the military that if you've gotten an order you think is illegal, you're not supposed to just comply with it. You're supposed to try to question it and figure out if it really has a legal justification. So we don't know, obviously, what happened internally in the military when these orders came down. But the idea that a boat that was heading back to Venezuela, in which people had had absolutely zero due process, and the Secretary of State is saying we could have detained them, that the military would issue these orders and just summarily, effectively execute people, like that is totally out of step. And I mean, Marty thinks that maybe this has never happened before in this particular way.
This is very different than, slaughtering a bunch of children and women in a village. Like this is different. Like you, if you're a person who is carrying out this order, you don't really know what's on that boat or why that boat has been put there, or what the whether them turning back signals like, oh, the threat is over. I think your ability to question that order and to not follow that order is very, 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 very limited. And I would think like not following that order, in fact, would be
the bigger problem.
Be the bigger problem. So like I don't see how any individual member of the military, even up to even pretty high up the chain, could ever be held responsible for carrying that out.
I don't think we know enough to say that about the people high up the chain yet. And I think it is really important for the military to maintain its integrity in the face of illegal orders, because another kind of possibility this whole scenario raises is the idea of the president saying he has the authority to do something like this on American soil. It's not actually clear, based on his theory of the case, why that would not also be true. And I think we would all agree that if troops start gunning down accused, quote, drug dealers with zero due process and evidence in a court, that would be wrong, and they should not do that.
This episode is brought to you by Built. Built is revolutionizing how millions think about paying rent by rewarding their members with points and exclusive benefits around their neighborhood every single month. By paying rent through Built, you earn flexible points that can be redeemed toward hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But it doesn't stop there. Built is about making your entire neighborhood more rewarding. You can dine out at your favorite local restaurants and earn additional points, get VIP treatment at certain fitness studios, and enjoy exclusive experiences just for Built members every month. Built is turning a monthly expense into an opportunity to earn rewards and discover the best that your neighborhood has to offer. Your rent is finally working for you. Earn points on rent and around your neighborhood wherever you call home by going to joinbuilt.com/Gabfest. That's joinbilt.com/Gabfest. Make sure to use the unique URL joinbilt.com/Gabfest.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I was just floating around on Saks's website, Saks.com, and I found all kinds of cute things like a cool pair of sunglasses, a beanie cashmere hat by Gorski, socks that looked appealing, a Camilla bucket hat. So this fall, whether you're trying out the latest fashion trends or curating a closet that stands the test of time, Saks has you covered. Saks makes shopping feel personal. They have trusted in-store stylists who are there to guide and inspire you. And if you prefer online shopping, Saks.com offers a curated selection tailored to your taste, from new arrivals by your favorite designers to stylish pieces for your everyday needs. Whether it's date night, a vacation, a special occasion, or just lounging in style, Saks helps you find the perfect look for every occasion. If you want shopping to be fun and easy, then head to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day.
This episode is brought to you by Planned Parenthood Federation of America. You've seen the headlines. The Trump administration is attacking sexual and reproductive health care. It's the kind of big, urgent topic that deserves more than just cocktail chatter. But Planned Parenthood Federation of America's commitment to care never stops, no matter what. Planned Parenthood health centers are still here, providing compassionate, affordable, and judgment-free care for everyone. Some lawmakers are trying to end abortion access, slash funding people rely on for care, and shut down Planned Parenthood health centers. These attacks only deepen the healthcare crisis they created, putting millions at risk. But here's the truth. Planned Parenthood has been there for over a century because of supporters like you. With your commitment, they can keep defending the care people need, whether it's birth control, cancer screenings, abortion, gender-affirming care, or sex education. Planned Parenthood believes everyone should have the freedom to make decisions about their own bodies, no matter what, and that's something worth fighting for. When freedoms are at risk, what you do during pivotal moments matters most. Join the fight for health and rights by making a gift to support Planned Parenthood at plannedparenthood.org/defend.
We're joined by my good friend and CityCast colleague, Mike Schaefer. Mike is the host of the CityCast DC podcast. He is also a columnist for Politico and a fellow Washingtonian, and he has been doing an amazing job covering the disruption of Washington, D.C., both of our hometowns, during the Trump administration. So D.C. exists in a kind of political purgatory or limbo or netherworld or something. It has a limited amount of home rule, but is highly subject to federal control because it is the capital city and because it's outside of any state and because the president lives here. And so the president and his Republican allies have, for reasons that we're going to talk about, have upended DC in really significant ways, but three in particular that I just want to set the table with. One is DC has been a company town, huge numbers of federal employees, 200,000 of the jobs in DC are federal government jobs. And there have been these huge federal cuts led by DOJ to federal jobs. And it's having an enormous impact on what's been a very steady local economy for decades. Second, President Trump declared a kind of law enforcement emergency here in DC and took over this police department for 30 days. That period has just ended, but also brought in thousands of National Guard troops to police the streets, or to what they're doing is kind of ambiguous, to be on the streets of Washington, D.C., as well as large numbers of ICE patrols to do immigration sweeps in the city. And finally, Trump and the House Republicans are now also making a strong effort legislatively to overturn a bunch of laws and change how the city is governed and how the city rules itself. And that those efforts are kind of going on in the House. In fact, today, as we're taping, the mayor of DC, Muriel Bowser, and the city council chair and the attorney general are all testifying on Capitol Hill about some of these efforts. So, Mike, I've set the table. What has been the impact so far on our city economically and in public safety and on sort of the atmosphere of the city from what Trump and his allies have been doing?
I think the biggest change, and I say this as a person who grew up in Upper Northwest and lives there now, so that's my subjectivity, but is the sort of culture, right? The culture of Washington. The deal here has always been, we get these very talented people who come. You don't get Wall Street money, but you do get stability, security, and a sense of meaningful work. And that's gone. And, a lot of people who work in government and are proud to work in government, sort of, even if they've survived these cuts, they feel like they are having to comport themselves like political hacks. The ones who haven't survived the cuts are all of a sudden, cast out from what they thought would be a secure career. And the security part of that will, I think, never come back, because you could have an election, maybe, and you could have an awesome president who agrees with everything that you want, but that you're always one bad election away from your career civil service protected job not being so protected. So there's this feeling of like, I talked to people from like Detroit about what it was like when GM started to crumble. And, there was people who would say like, well, that's, it's right there. Look at that huge factory. It's not going anywhere. And that's the same sort of thing we have here, where people would say, well, they're not going to just close the education department. Look at it. It's right there. And, now that's not a given. And that is just an enormous, enormous change. And then it comes sort of now with this other thing of the law enforcement surge, the takeover of police, which is, I think, the way a lot of local people are experiencing, it's more sort of symbolically awful that these guys from like Mississippi and wherever are walking around with guns. On my placid Nebraska Avenue Northwest, people being pulled out of contractor vans in full view of neighbors who do the neighbor things and ask, what are you doing? Who are you? Where are you taking them? In one case, someone on my alley was then followed home by the ICE people. And these are privileged professional people who are feeling, the sense of insult and danger. There has not been the thing that everybody most worried about when Trump first announced the surge, was that some of these yahoos who are not trained to do urban policing, it's going to be one of these like 120-degree DC summer days, and like someone's going to say something dumb and someone's going to do something aggressive and someone's going to wind up shot. That hasn't happened. There has not been reports of that. So that's mostly being sort of perceived as insulting more than like practically changing your life. It has led to a much quieter crime atmosphere that criminologists say that's inevitably a temporary thing and is not sustainable, but who knows? And then the third thing you mentioned, these bills, there's sort of two types of them. One are there's this sort of, let's be tough on crime in every possible way and get rid of, one of the things they are trying to undo is there is a law that says if you were convicted of a crime before you're 25, you've served, I think, 15 years of your time, you can go to a judge and say, hey, reduce that sentence now. The practical effect of that, there's not that many people. I mean, in a city of 700,000, inevitably, there's not that many people who are affected by that. The other piece is the kind of screwing around with the workings of the city government, which I think a lot of the congressional Republicans don't view as a legitimate entity in the first place. So there's a line right now under the 50-year-old Home Rule Act. Congress can review all DC bills and reject them. It happens very, very infrequently. They want to do a line item veto on that. So they can say, well, we don't like this budget item. And they want the review to also extend to any mayoral orders. So if the mayor wants something, that she has to wait 60 days to get Congress to not reject it. So that is like, in addition to the sort of undemocratic, Americans are supposed to be able to self-govern, in addition to that part, that's also like a recipe practically for just like all kinds of unideological chaos. So all this going on.
Yeah, and also similarly with our judges, so right now there's a commission that decides who to recommend for the local judgeships, but this would get rid of it and give the president full power just to appoint. I mean, the president has the power to name judges anyway, but this would get rid of this layer of recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, this bill that would give the president the power to determine who the attorney general of DC is, that's basically like the district attorney.
Right.
of the city. I mean, again, it's all part of Trump's like idea that he should decide everything, but it's such an incursion in the idea of home rule for the district, and could really change how law enforcement works.
Right now, and for the last 50 years, the prosecutor here, it's an anomaly. The prosecutor here is the U.S. attorney. So the same federal prosecutor that prosecutes federal crimes also prosecutes purse snatchings and so on. The juvenile crimes are handled by the locals. And that is a city attorney general. That's been an elected job only for like 10 or 15 years. Before that, it was appointed by the city's mayor. What the change that is in one of these Republican bills is that would be appointed by the president and not subject to Senate confirmation. So this is, the city attorney general, like state attorney generals, it does like, it was part of that suit against Facebook, right? It does like state attorney general things. If there's an unconfirmed Trump appointee or appointee of any president, the kind of political implications and the muscle flexing against actors in national politics, the possibility of that seems like pretty amazing and weird and uncharted.
Michael, what does this embed in what will be required to either serve as mayor or be elected as mayor? Like, how will these sort of three different things you've identified, although the troops will, presumably go away, although they could be brought back, I suppose, at any moment. But the changes both in the hollowing out of meaning, I could imagine that just changes the character of the city, and that makes things different for mayor. But how do you think this affects the mayor?
It's such a good question because part of the job of mayor of Washington, that's not part of the job of other mayors, is this sort of, you are effectively the lobbyist to these bosses who don't answer to your constituents. And so that, any executive has some kind of public communications component, but this is a different sort of thing. And that's a big part of the city conversation right now with the elected but non-voting city delegate to Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton. She's the oldest member of the House. The big part of her job is lobbying for DC's interests that the city needs to effectively ask Congress permission to do. And there's a lot of concern that she is not up to that task. But I think that voters in the city, will look one way or the other at the mayor's performance in terms of being an advocate for the city vis-a-vis the federal government as a part of the job. Our current mayor, Muriel Bowser, she's been quite effective by basically doing a kind of go along, rope-a-dope tactic. She gives ground on a lot of symbolic things that there's a lot of other politicians who would kind of play to the gallery, say, hell no, I'm not going to rip up the Black Lives Matter street mural. The mayor's view was, sure, like nobody gets their medical funding from a street mural. So I'm going to play ball on that and look out for number one. At a certain point, though, I think the symbolism becomes so extreme that there's at least some part of her constituency who are going to be mighty pissed off about that.
Well, isn't that happening now? I mean, she has now said we're not going to continue cooperating on immigration enforcement, and I think she has to testify before Congress today. So
she's tried to be cute about that. The city law is that, it is a matter of law in DC that the police are not allowed to do certain types of cooperation with ICE. And what she has said is, President Trump, I am going to order the city to cooperate to the fullest extent of the law. And like the law does a lot of work there. So when Trump hears that, he's happy, and then he realizes it actually doesn't mean what he thinks it means.
I also got the feeling, though, that now that these 30 days of the emergency order are up, that she's trying to draw a different line. And that seemed like perfectly legitimate, right? To recognize that this Washington is different than other places. The president did have this special emergency power, for better or worse, but it's supposed to be finished after a month. And so now she's going to try to, rely on the law, but also draw a different kind of line. It'll be interesting to see what she says in front of Congress today, because obviously the Republicans or whoever wants to ask questions will be able to grill her.
Mike, when you and I were talking about this yesterday, I don't get the sense, Emily, that we're going to see some radical shift, that she's suddenly, now she's going to stand up and be like very potently against Trump. I mean, Mike, can you talk about gray rocking, your wonderful description of that?
Right. I am married to a therapist, and she talks about this concept, gray rocking, which is what they tell people who are in relationships with narcissists, that you need to be as boring as a gray rock. Just, I'm sorry you feel that way. It must really suck to feel that way. Like that sort of thing. You acknowledge what they're saying, but you don't do anything to disturb the surface of the water. And that has been a very effective political tactic for her, not just with Trump, but with, all kinds of players, and so that she will sort of sit there and kind of take it and not react emotionally. It's different than particularly a lot of historic sort of legendary big city mayors who are such impulsive and emotional characters. It's sort of worked for her. I don't know, though, that it does much in the long term to sort of build a real relationship or win real points. I mean, she gave Trump everything. I wrote this. So she gave Trump everything a blue city mayor could be expected to give him. He still took over the police and kicked her in the teeth and ran down her city in pretty extreme terms.
Well, she has a bad hand she's playing, right? She just doesn't have a whole lot of power.
She's a terrible hand. I think that smart people who watch politics often appreciate, such and such politician is doing a brilliant job playing this rotten hand. Regular voters often don't forever use that way of grading.
Can I just jump in with an obscure point, but one that struck me just now? Are we all using poker metaphors much, much more in this second Trump era because everything has become essentially a gamble and a question of leverage, which is what the cards stand in for? Obviously, there was the famous Oval Office confrontation where Trump said Zelensky didn't have the cards, and he said, "With me, you start having cards." I just wonder if we're driven in that direction.
That's a profound point, in fact.
That's alarming because DC has historically the worst run professional sports betting and gambling industry in the country. We've historically we've done it really poorly, and the odds makers in the DC gambet industry were notoriously bad, and DC is the only place that's ever lost money doing sports gambling. But just to close this topic, Mike. So the president has been paying attention to DC. It's the city where he lives. He's highly attuned to the symbolic value of place. He recognizes that he has a lot of leverage over it. And so he's really focused on it. Do you expect that this will continue? Do you think, we have the semi-quincentennial coming up. Is DC going to remain in his crosshairs because DC will be hosting these 250th anniversary celebrations?
I don't think I've ever heard somebody get semi-quincentennial on the first go before. Congratulations.
But I heard somebody say it yesterday. So it was in my head. I heard somebody say it.
Oh my God. I was also struck by that.
Yes.
I'm a pro.
You are.
Also, you very neatly put 250th anniversary in the next clause so that people would hopefully know what you meant, because I am never going to remember that word and refuse to.
Nice.
But 250th anniversary, I understand what that is. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, man, I think it's going to be, in the Trumpy way, it will be a recurring thing. His attention will wander, then it'll come back, etc. One of the theories of people I talk to in City Hall here is, look, this guy, he goes out to, he's in London right now, but he goes to a lot of autocratic capitals, Riyadh or whatever, and the government there, the streets are spotless. They make it so that every school child gets the afternoon off to stand on the street with an American flag to wave at the American president during the state visit. And he wonders, and I don't think he'd be the first American president to wonder, why don't they treat me like this at home? Unlike his predecessors, I think he thinks he has the legal power, or wants to use the legal power, to force them to do some of these things at home, keep the capital city clean. And he said on one of the talk shows he was on last week, he said, well, I can change the DC mayor if I want, which legally is not the case. But, I sort of think of one of the reasons executives in politics misbehave is sort of that moment when they realize how much power they don't have. Clinton felt hogtied by the Republicans and the media, and maybe that explains this terribly reckless behavior of his. In DC, that was a lot of people's explanation for Marion Barry. With Trump, though, the power he is shocked to find out he doesn't have is actually, a matter of law. It's not a matter of customs. So when he finds out that he can't just change the mayor of Washington, that'll be a moment of anger and lashing out. And so I expect you'll see this as sort of a recurring theme, but probably not a every single day of the next 3 years theme.
Michael Schaefer is columnist at Politico, and more importantly, the host of CityCast DC, the daily podcast to listen to CityCast DC. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. If you were here in Washington, you'd be sitting with me and Mike and like having a beer and just talking about this stuff. But you're not, Emily. So what are you going to be chattering about in your municipality?
Robert Redford died this week. I loved Robert Redford. I'm sure there's some set of complex emotions to have about him, like any movie star, but I didn't have them. When I was growing up, he was just, the total heartthrob on the screen that he was reputed to be. And I watched his classic movies growing up and, I've watched some of them since then. There's this kind of minor Robert Redford movie that came out in 1979 called The Electric Horseman, in which he plays this like washed up rodeo star and tries to save a horse. And Jane Fonda is very much in the middle of it as this feisty TV journalist who gets involved with him and with this horse. And I loved that movie. I confess I have not seen it since then. It's possible it doesn't hold up. But I kind of think that in its weird way, it had some like feminist notes in it. Jane Fonda was playing this journalist who was like out there trying to get a story and then ends up getting to hang out with Robert Redford. So I hope it's great. And I want to go watch it again. And if you've never seen it and you want to go down a kind of Robert Redford rabbit hole, check out The Electric Horseman, which I hope is still good.
John.
You know, what I realized, if I may just jump in on this, is that, when I think about what movies kind of define great, big, successful, beginning to end movies from a formative period in my life, The Sting was for a long time and may still be my favorite movie ever.
Totally agree.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, also an amazing film. All the President's Men obviously has extra resonance for growing up in Washington, what we do. And The Natural, like those are four, and he's in all of them.
I would throw The Way We Were with Barbra Streisand into that package.
I have never seen that, and unfortunately, because the music from that has been in, I think this was a piece of legislation in every elevator in Christendom.
It was kind of great. Again, I haven't seen it for a long time.
No, you can't hear that song. You can't hear that song without smelling the perfume from the perfume aisle at Saks Fifth Avenue, where I'm sure it was playing.
Right. It might have been good originally, though, right?
Oh, my God. I'm sure it was great originally, but it's just been, I came to it in the wrong order. Anyway, so those are my reminiscences about an extraordinary acting career. I have two very quick chatters. One is just to follow up on Emily's wise question about whether the octopus has an arm or a foot. It turns out... and I think I got this from John Ellis's news items, which I get most of my interesting things from. Octopuses have 8 arms to choose from, but it turns out that they may have favorites. So there was a report in Scientific Reports that suggested, by analyzing videos of wild octopuses engaging in different activities, swimming, hunting, doing their taxes, that they used front arms more than their back arms. Now, how you would know, I guess.
What does that even mean? Front arms?
I know. I'm just saying.
Oh, come on. I think that makes sense. The ones nearer to their head. And maybe it's like being right-footed or left-footed.
What do you mean front nearer to their head?
Don't they have a head?
Yeah, but the head is in the center.
Is it? It's the octopus is like a circle. It's not like a ovoid or whatever that word is.
But all the arms, the arms are equally equidistant from the head, aren't they?
Well, then what does front and back mean?
That's my question is what is front and back?
All right, we're going to have to investigate. This is an important Gabfest investigation, the anatomy of the octopus.
This is what people on television call a talker. So that's one thing. Also, then this is just more briefly, I didn't realize there's something called the Kessler syndrome, which is, I think, it basically has something to do with the fact that there is so much debris in low Earth orbit. Rockets are no longer capable of reaching it without being hit with hypersonic parts of defunct equipment. Again, probably from John Ellis's news items. Anyway, seems like a kind of big deal.
It's a huge deal. Deal. There are projections about like at what point does space become unreachable for us? Period. Yeah. Because there's so much, and it's frightening. And actually, that's one of the objections to all of the sort of SpaceX of it all, because they put so many satellites up. There's so much more that's going up every day, and every bit that puts up, there's usually some, they lose a screw here, or some rocket fails, and there's extra stuff floating around there. And no one has a great idea. There are a lot of ideas, like for shooting lasers at all the space debris to destroy it, or they need some like garbage collection. Anyway,
as listeners of the Gabfest know, verily, I have lost a screw here.
It's loose. It's only loose. It's not lost. All right, my chatter. Two quick ones. One wonderful story in the Washington Post about by Kasha Patel about how a Finnish technology firm that makes the cooling units for quantum computers has just bought $300 million worth of helium that is on the moon. There's a special kind of helium that they believe is on the moon, helium-3, which is even colder, and like it helps you get even colder. And they bought from a company called Interloon. Interloon had plans to mine the moon, which you're allowed to do, which I didn't realize under some 2015 law, we're allowed to mine the moon. They plan to mine the moon to get this rare form of helium and bring it back to Earth. And it is currently the only resource that is thought to be economically sensible to mine this in space. Nothing else. Like there's all these hopes about, one day there'll be, all the palladium in that asteroid could help us on Earth. But that is not economically viable. But helium-3 is thought to be economically viable. And so there's a plan to go harvest it. It seems all very hypothetical, theoretical, but I admire the moxie of it. Secondly, I went to an amazing exhibit. If you're in DC and you ever get the chance to go to my favorite museum, the Renwick, which is the craft museum of the Smithsonian. They have an exhibit on state fairs and the crafts of state fairs. And so they've collected incredible examples of crafting from state fairs going back to the 1830s of, wonderful quilts or wonderful bits of crocheting, art made out of straw, seed art, portraits of Dolly Parton made just out of amaranth seeds. And it's a fantastic, delightful exhibit. It'll make your week. So check that out at the Renwick. Listeners, you also have chatters. You have sent them to us at gabfest@slate.com. Please keep them coming by emailing to us there. And our listener chatter this week comes from Jesse Bennett in Richmond.
My chatter is about a post from the Library of Virginia's history blog titled One of the Most Unique Papers. The post tells 3 stories about Chinese immigration in the late 19th century, including that of Charles William Singh. Charles William was born in Richmond in 1895, a time when Virginia was not issuing birth certificates. His father, Wu Sing, was afraid his son would not be recognized as a natural-born citizen, and so paid to file an affidavit in court with the testimony of the attending midwife, his landlady, and a customer of his who also happened to be a prominent local politician. The sobering intro says that Singh is concerned that the authorities will not believe his son is a citizen due to his race and color, and will therefore endanger his constitutional rights. You can read the whole document and learn how it helped Charles in later years at the Library of Virginia's Uncommonwealth blog.
That's all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the Trump crypto UAE chips mishegas. That is only for Slate Plus members, however. Slate Plus members get lots of great stuff. You get bonus episodes on the Gabfest and other Slate podcasts. You never hit the paywall on the Slate site. You get special discounts to live shows. And believe you me, we're about to have some live shows. We got some plans. So you might want to get your Slate Plus membership so you can get a discount to those live shows. So if you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, you can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. Plus, thank you, John. Appreciate that. Plus is the word that we plus one here always on the Gabfest. We're not the only Slate podcast worth listening to this week. You might want to check out an episode about Kash Patel. And it's an episode of What Next, about what happens to an organization like the FBI when its leadership is purged and it starts hiring for reasons other than excellence and ability, but maybe for loyalty. And so there's an episode of the Slate podcast, What Next? Can Kash Patel Survive This? That is our show for today. The Political Gabfest was produced today by our new producer, Nina Porzucki. Nina, welcome. It's great to have you. We look forward to long may you reign. We will say goodbye to our producer, Shayna, soon. But we will miss you, but you're still here a little bit too. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Ops. Mia Lobel is Executive Producer of Slate Podcast. Hillary Fry is Editor-in-Chief of Slate. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I was just floating around on Saks's website, Saks.com, and I found all kinds of cute things, like a cool pair of sunglasses, a beanie cashmere hat by Gorski, socks that looked appealing, a Camilla bucket hat. So this fall, whether you're trying out the latest fashion trends or curating a closet that stands the test of time, Saks has you covered. Saks makes shopping feel personal. They have trusted in-store stylists who are there to guide and inspire you. And if you prefer online shopping, Saks.com offers a curated selection tailored to your taste, from new arrivals by your favorite designers to stylish pieces for your everyday needs. Whether it's date night, a vacation, a special occasion, or just lounging in style, Saks helps you find the perfect look for every occasion. If you want shopping to be fun and easy, then head to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day.
Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise.